Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing great. In this episode, I will gather all the steps required for us to set up a Kubernetes cluster. That is by using kubeadm tool, and the series, of course, assumes that you have a solid understanding about the Kubernetes architecture. Again, I am not going to cover that in detail in this series, since we're only going to focus on the lab exercises, but at the high level. The key components of the cluster would be master node and also the worker node. Master node is where all the control plane components will be installed, whereas in the worker node, we're looking at kubelet, kube proxy, and then the Docker engine being the main ones. For the practice purposes, I would install a lower version first and then upgrade to the higher version. For that, we will need to identify and plan the version very carefully, and that we want to use the creating the Kubernetes cluster. To make sure you have a good grasp of the architecture, I have pasted the link here below for the Kubernetes architecture that takes you directly to the kubernetes.io page, for a detailed overview about the architecture. Each of the control plane components, such as like a kube API server, scheduler, controller manager, etcd, and all that. So the key steps for creating a Kubernetes cluster are installing runtime, which is Docker. And then we will be installing three major key components: kubeadm, kubelet, and kubectl. And we will also need a pod network, Calico in my case, so we have to install the pod network add-on. And then we have to configure the access for non-root users once the cluster is set up. Finally, we will also join the worker nodes. And that actually completes our setup of the complete cluster that includes master and worker nodes. So let's go through the steps one more time, including the commands for each. The installation or upgrade procedure itself is not that hard, guys, because kubeadm automates all of that in the backend. All the steps listed here are documented in kubernetes.io site. So you're allowed to reference that site in the exam. So no need to memorize anything here. Sounds cool, isn't it? Yes. So the step 5 here, of course, I'd strongly suggest that you plan and identify the versions of your installation ahead of time. In my case, I'm installing 1.19.1 version so that we can upgrade to 1.20, whatever the subversion is in the next exercise. I highly encourage you review this session at least a couple times or bookmark this video for future reference. I do not think you will be asked to create a cluster in the exam. However, this will really help you understand the upgrade process, which is pretty much the same except few commands that are specific to the upgrade. Again, I will discuss the upgrade process in detail in the next video, but please hang tight and watch till the end. So before we proceed to the next steps, I just wanted to navigate you guys through the Kubernetes documentation webpage, where you can see the installation, kubeadm, kubelet, and kubectl. This is available on this page, and the URL is here. I will also copy the URL below for your reference. Again, the steps are pretty straightforward. These are the steps that I've actually showed you on the slide set. You first basically do the system update and upgrades. You copy and go through all these steps over here as it details, and then finally you create you basically refer to this documentation page for creating a cluster, which is available here. It talks about all different steps that are required for creating a cluster. We will be using the kubeadm init with a configuration file option that I'm going to show you next. However, all the information for the flags and arguments that you can pass with the kubeadm init are available on this page. Once you're, the kubeadm runs all the series of pre-checks to ensure the machine is ready. And once that's all done, you would see the output like this, where you would be using some of this output for setting up the access for the regular users. Then you will also copy this, the last piece of this output for joining the worker nodes. So pretty much it's pretty straightforward. If you want more reference about the kubeadm init with the configuration file itself, that's available under a separate section. You can reference and then get a good understanding about how all that works. But for the sake of setting up the cluster, if you follow the documentation that I just shared with you, and that should be good enough. Again, as we have seen in the documentation pages, I tried to compile all of that information in one single slide here for your ease, and it makes your lives easier. So I hope this helps. basically you would be copying, downloading the Calico YAML, which is the manifest for the entire pod add-on network. And then you have the cluster-conf.yaml, which we will create during the lab session, and I'll show it to you. I've given it a name of cluster-conf. Again, this is in beta mode. Guys, the config file is still considered beta and may change in future versions. So it's possible to configure all of that instead of command line flags. And some more advanced features may only be available as the configuration file options. Again, the network part subnet that you can see here is available in the YAML file, from where we would extract the IPv4 subnet address and then supply that information in your cluster-conf.yaml. Then we will use kubeadm init with flag --config, provide the YAML file name, and then we would also output the entire installation into a separate file so we can refer to it after the install. Last but not least, we would also apply the calico.yaml that we downloaded to the cluster. So once that's available, the pod network is enabled, then you would see all the kube-system pods inside that namespace would come up. And again, the last ABC, the 3 points that I've listed here, are basically an output of the installation that will appear in your setup during the install. If you carefully follow these steps and perform the exercise, which I'm going to show you in live in another session, next session, where your cluster control plane should be up and running. This would be your final step where you want to set up the worker node and join the worker node to your Kubernetes cluster. Make sure you are on the worker node. It is quite possible to run these commands on master, and that can potentially create issues to your control plane. So you exit from your master, come out to your worker node, and make SSH into the right IP address. Then the steps on the worker node are quite straightforward here. As I showed you in Kubernetes documentation pages, we're pretty much repeating all the same steps that we performed on the master node, except the pod network add-on module, which is not needed here. So we will then be using --token and --hash, which can be collected from the output that we saved when creating the control plane itself. So that is why I've highlighted the last step, which is standing out separately than the ones that you listed here. Again, in my next video, I would show you each one of these commands and give you a detailed walkthrough. So it's much more simpler and easier that way. Okay. Again, thank you for dialing into the part 4 Slingshot CKA series. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Please do like and share. Again, without further ado, let's get the cluster installation started. We'll have more fun there.